On a Tuesday in April 2025, 3 white puppies with amber eyes howled into a camera in a secret sanctuary somewhere in America. The internet fell in love. Time magazine put them on the cover. George R.R. Martin wept. The company that made them hit a $10.2 billion valuation overnight. We had, it seemed, brought an extinct species back from the dead. A beast last seen 12,000 years ago, when mammoths still walked North America, the dire wolf. Back, except 6 weeks later, the chief scientist of the company that created them said something very quiet and very honest. She said, "They're not dire wolves." Today, we're going to tell you what actually happened, what the science can and cannot do, and why the most interesting thing about this story is not the puppies. It's the 6-week gap between we brought them back and actually we didn't. This is a story about ancient DNA, gene editing, marketing, and a very old question. What does it mean to bring something back? If you rewrite 20 genes in a gray wolf so its puppies look like dire wolves, have you resurrected a species? Or have you made a very expensive cosplay? The answer matters, because companies are now worth billions of dollars based on the promise that they can reverse extinction. And the loudest critics of those companies are not outsiders. They're the scientists inside the building. Let's start with something real. In a specimen drawer in Ohio, there is a tooth. It is roughly the size of a human thumbnail. It belonged to an animal that died 13,000 years ago and fell into a limestone cave it could not climb out of. The cave is called Sheridan. It has swallowed bison, bears, and giant beavers from the last ice age. In a different specimen drawer, in Idaho, there is an ear bone, 72,000 years old. Inside that tooth and that bone, there is DNA. Not a lot. Ancient DNA fragments, damaged by time, survive in tiny loops of about 100 base pairs. You need special techniques, very clean rooms, and extraordinary patience to pull them out. But it works. In 2021, a scientist named Angela Puri led a team that extracted DNA from 5 dire wolf fossils. They sequenced the genome, and what they found changed the field. Dire wolves were not close cousins of gray wolves. They were genetically closer to African jackals. And the 2 lineages had split, not from a common wolf ancestor 500,000 years ago, but from a deeply divergent canid 5.7 million years ago. Dire wolves were, in other words, the last survivors of an ancient New World line of predators. They just happened to look like gray wolves because they lived like gray wolves. Convergent evolution. This is a real beautiful piece of science. Remember this number, 5.7 million years. Now, de-extinction. In the 2010s, a Texas entrepreneur named Ben Lamb teamed up with a Harvard geneticist named George Church. Church had spent decades working on CRISPR, the gene editing tool that lets you change DNA 1 letter at a time. Lamb and Church founded Colossal Biosciences in 2021. Their pitch was audacious. Take the ancient DNA of extinct species, compare it to the DNA of close living relatives, edit the living cells to match the extinct ones. Grow embryos, resurrect species. Mammoth was the headline animal, the thylacine, the dodo. These were the roadmap. The dire wolf was not. In early 2025, Colossal needed a showstopper, something to justify a $10 billion valuation. They were closing that January, so they took gray wolf cells. They isolated something called endothelial progenitor cells, the kind of cells that can develop into an embryo. They used CRISPR to make 20 edits. 15 of those edits were based on comparisons to dire wolf DNA. 5 of them were something else. 5 of the edits had nothing to do with dire wolf DNA. Those 5 were cosmetic. They knocked out 2 genes, MC1R and MFS-D12, to produce a white coat, because in Game of Thrones, the dire wolves are white. They implanted 45 engineered embryos into domestic dog surrogates. 4 embryos. On the morning of April 7th, 2025, something unusual happened. Time magazine ran a cover story. The New York Times published a feature. The New Yorker dropped a long raid. The Today Show ran a live segment. All, simultaneously, all on the same morning. All saying the same thing. The dire wolf is back. Ben Lamb, the CEO, said this on camera, quote, "Our team took DNA from a 13,000-year-old tooth and a 72,000-year-old skull and made healthy dire wolf puppies. George R.R. Martin, the author who invented the Game of Thrones dire wolves, said this, 'The rebirth of the dire wolf has stirred me as no scientific news has since Neil Armstrong walked on the moon.' The 3 puppies, Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi, howled into cameras from a secret 2,000-acre preserve, surrounded by 10-foot fencing, at an undisclosed location in the United States. 24 hours later, Colossal's valuation was locked in at $10.2 billion. The internet was enchanted, and the scientists started publishing. April 8th, the day after, scientists who work with ancient DNA, the ones who actually read Perry's 2021 paper, began speaking up. Dr. Jacqueline Gill, a paleoecologist at the University of Maine, said it plainly. Quote, "The work that's being done at Colossal has not brought a species back from extinction. It's a genetically modified wolf." She added, quote, "We don't do science by press release in the absence of a paper. We don't do science by New Yorker and Time magazine announcements. Because, and here's the thing, Colossal had not published a peer-reviewed paper alongside their announcement. They made 20 edits to a gray wolf and called it a dire wolf, without first giving other scientists the data to check. 10 days after the announcement, on April 18th, the IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, issued a formal statement through its Canid specialist group. It said, quote, "The animals are neither dire wolves nor proxies. Not dire wolves. Not proxies. By the formal definitions used in conservation biology for decades." Then, 6 weeks after the announcement, on May 22nd, the chief scientist of Colossal Biosciences, Dr. Beth Shapiro, one of the most respected paleogeneticists alive, sat down with New Scientist magazine, and she said the words that ended the story. Quote, "Our animals are gray wolves with 20 edits that are cloned. Gray wolves with 20 edits," the chief scientist of the company that announced the resurrection of the dire wolf, confirmed what the outside critics had been saying for 6 weeks. These are not dire wolves. They are gray wolves with cosmetic and phenotypic edits. 3 of the edits for a Hollywood white coat that no one has proven the real dire wolf ever had. She added, gently, that true de-extinction is impossible. Here is what is strange about this story. The science Colossal actually did. Extracting usable DNA from a 13,000-year-old tooth and a 72,000-year-old ear bone is genuinely astonishing. Ancient DNA damaged by 72,000 years of freeze and thaw, sequenced well enough to identify 20 candidate trait genes. That is hard, beautiful science. It is the same field Angela Puri's team used to prove dire wolves were their own ancient lineage. Using CRISPR to edit 20 specific genes in a living gray wolf cell, grow 45 embryos, and carry 3 pups to a healthy birth. That is also hard, beautiful science. None of that is fake. What is fake, or at least what is oversold, is the word dire wolf at the end. because a gray wolf with 20 edits is still, by every genetic measure we have, a gray wolf. It is like taking a human being, editing 20 genes to give them a more pronounced brow ridge and a stockier build, and saying you have brought back the Neanderthal. You have made a modified human. You have not crossed 500,000 years of evolutionary separation with 20 edits. And Colossal's own DNA reference, Angela Puri's work, says they are trying to cross 5.7 million years. The closer you look at the science, the more beautiful it is. The closer you look at the marketing, the less the marketing holds up. I keep coming back to this. There is nothing wrong with making a gray wolf that howls deeper, runs bigger, and has a white coat. That is an amazing achievement. Those puppies exist. They are healthy. They are loved on 2,000 acres of forest. What bothers me, what I want you to notice, is what happens when we confuse the achievement with the claim. The achievement. We can edit 20 genes in a living mammal and produce a viable pup that looks more like something ancient. The claim. We brought a species back from extinction. Those are two different sentences, and only one of them is supported by the data. Extinction. And the paleontologist Jacqueline Gill made this point on a quiet podcast months after the news cycle ended. Extinction is not a software bug you patch. It is a deep structural change to the web of life. A species lives inside an ecosystem that took millions of years to grow around it. You can reproduce the shape of the animal. You cannot reproduce the world it lived in. The dire wolves of the Pleistocene ran down horses that no longer exist, on plains that no longer exist, alongside saber-toothed cats that no longer exist. 20 edits in a gray wolf do not bring that world back. No amount of edits can. But the beautiful thing is, we already knew this. We knew it from Perry's paper in 2021. We knew it from 40 years of conservation biology. We knew it from the simple fact that the dire wolf took 5.7 million years to become itself. And a spreadsheet of 20 CRISPR changes in a Texas lab is not 5.7 million years. What the story of the dire wolf really shows us is not what science can do. It's what science is, and what it isn't. When it arrives on a magazine cover before it arrives in a peer-reviewed journal. Somewhere, right now, in a clinic lab, a technician is holding up a small glass vial. Inside it is a single drop of blood. Yours, perhaps. Someone's. The technology they are about to run on, it will read fragments of DNA that do not belong to you, fragments shed by cells that may be quietly turning into cancer, in organs you cannot see, in tissues you have not felt. 50 different cancers, all at once, from one drop of blood, before you have a single symptom. They call it Galleri, or multi-cancer early detection. It is the most ambitious use of circulating DNA analysis ever attempted in medicine. And the same field, the reading of fragmentary DNA, that let Angela Perry tell us what a dire wolf really was, and let Colossal edit 20 genes in a gray wolf, is now being asked to find the quietest signal a human body sends, before anyone has to lose anyone they love, whether it works. That is a different story.